So you've read all the headlines about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the pushback, the resistance, the battles. This panel knows a thing or two about that. They're going to talk about what it's like in real life, inclusivity in practice, shaping your company's culture, and how to do it. Moderating this discussion will be David Thigpen. He is a journalism professor at UC Berkeley, former Time magazine reporter who covered New York and Chicago, Wall Street, pop music, and Chicago politics. Please welcome David and his panel of speakers to the stage.
Okay, welcome to the Inclusive Culture panel. And I want to start by asking my panelists to please introduce themselves, say a little bit about their company, and how you got into the HR field. Okay, start with Janine.
Okay, hello everyone, I'm Janine Yancey. I'm a founder and CEO of a company called Emtrain, and we help companies create healthier workplace cultures by strengthening the skills in ethics, respect, and inclusion. And I came to work in the inclusion field from my prior career as an employment litigator, doing lots of fighting. and actually, I realized that the fighting happens because people don't have inclusion skills, and when we have too many differences and we don't understand each other, it ends up being the fighting, and I was tired of the fighting, so I dove into inclusion.
Thank you, Janine. Hi, Sudha Solayappan. I work for a company called Intuitive, or Intuitive Surgical. How many of you know the company? Oh, quite a few. It's great. So Intuitive as a company is a leader in surgical robotics. And now we are moving into the diagnostic robotics space as well. It's a pretty cool product. When David said he's going to ask this question, I said, no, I don't have anything interesting to say. How did I get into this? But I tell you this, I started with a degree in computer science. I find myself here. And the way I approached this and how I got into it was more looking at inclusion, HR, through an analytical lens and a lot of data. So I'll touch on a lot of those aspects today.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Curran Brugger. I head up the talent development and inclusion organization at Gilead Sciences, which is a biopharma based not too far from here in Foster City. And a little bit about how I got into this space. I moved into the world of, I would say, the whole spectrum of talent development inclusion after leaving college and thinking I was going to be an investment banker and realizing that is absolutely not what I wanted to do. And no offense to any investment bankers, but I'd spent a lot of my career, I was a college athlete, I played sports my whole life, and really was interested in what makes great teams great, and what makes other teams not so great, and what is the role of the leader in all of that. And so I found my way through consulting and then have spent most of my career in pharmaceuticals, biopharma, because I really just love the work that we do and how purpose-driven it is. But much more in inclusion that we'll talk about, so I'll hand over to Brian.
Well, thank you. I'm Brian Little. I actually have two jobs. I'm a VP of HR at Intel Corporation. But I also am the Chief People Officer of one of our spin-out businesses that will be a separate business in a year. And then I'll leave Intel and be the full-time Chief People Officer for that business. So lots going on. And but the way I got into this, years ago, I had this challenging assignment from one of my bosses to work with this consultant they were kind of a little bit scared of. Her name was Jane Elliott. I don't know if anybody's ever seen Jane. Jane is famous for the brown eye, blue eye exercise. And she had just started doing this work and had really kind of built it up just a little. And I didn't know anything about her. But if you've ever seen this exercise of trying to show how discrimination systematically works with people, and all she had in Osage, Iowa was eye color, because they didn't have African Americans or other people of color. So brown eyes and blue eyes. Through that exercise, doing that at a corporate level with executives, and seeing that same behavior being repeated over and over and over again, group after group, it just helped me understand that if I could do anything to ensure that you can take those lessons forward and make changes systematically in organizations so they could work on where discrimination really lives and be able to change that, it was great. And so Jane has been around forever. If you ever get a chance, please look her work up. I learned a lot. It was one of the best experiences I ever had from a working standpoint.
Fantastic. So there's no question that inclusivity is important, but there's also challenges to it. With hybrid work, the rise of AI, rising expectations among employees, all raise questions about sustainability. So I want to start by asking each of you to talk a little bit about sharing an example or a concept of inclusivity and that you've witnessed, and sort of describe for us what it looks like when it's working. And let's start with you, Janine.
I think I would just leverage, I think, probably one of the most common inclusive scenes that we can see, where you see an act of allyship or somebody who does have influence in a room, really just set somebody up for success. And I've seen that both internally in our organization, but then externally with some of the clients we work with. And you can start to map, little acts like that just create a space for others to feel comfortable. And it has a direct correlation really on their trajectory on what they can do within their teams.
Fascinating. Okay. Sudha.
I'll share a personal story. This happened like a couple of decades ago, but something that's still stuck with me. So I was in a conferencing dinner or something. It was a networking dinner. It was a long table. I had arrived late, and I was sitting as the last person on the table. The person adjacent to me was sitting like this. And they were having a conversation, so I was cut off from the table pretty much. And I didn't know, I felt very awkward. I was much younger. There was another gentleman on the table who asked me a question. And automatically I got included into that discussion. What was beautiful about it was a very subtle question he asked, and it was a message to the person to my left as well that I need to be included, but without alienating that person. I would say I'm still great friends with both of them, and it was a very powerful message of inclusion for me personally.
Curran, please.
Yeah, so I'll share a personal story as well, because I think that seeing inclusion, I also feel like I am a strong ally and all those great things, but it wasn't until I was really confronted with what does inclusion really mean on a personal level that I really, you have to make difficult choices and you have to be uncomfortable. And I went through a little bit of this with my daughter, who is transgender, and she actually came out when we were living abroad in Switzerland. And we didn't know that she was transgender, and we were working with her teacher, because we were noticing that things were uncomfortable for her, that she was kind of challenged in certain situations. And her teacher took it upon herself to put in the classroom a dress-up corner for the third graders, so that my daughter would feel, who's now my daughter, Beatrice, would feel comfortable. And for me, that single act changed the entire course of her life, because it made her feel comfortable in being who she really is, and contributing and being a part of the classroom in a way that we couldn't do for her. So for me, I go back to that, and we still are in touch with that teacher. She's an amazing person. But it was a simple act that allowed for Beatrice to be who she truly is. So that's my story.
That's extremely touching, and that's moving to hear that.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
That's really extraordinary.
And yay for the teachers. The teachers are amazing.
It sounds like a person I'd like to meet, but that's a really, really strong story. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I wanted to share a practice. One of the things that Intel does really well is to really dig deep into specific issues in our population. One of the things that we do an engagement survey like everyone does, but we also, as part of the engagement survey, there's an inclusion survey that follows up on that. It's optional if people take it, but enough people do that we can get really good data. And then when we pull that inclusion survey, it gives a different focus. It gives us the intersectionality of people. Very few of us are just one thing. In fact, no one really is. You may be a woman. You may be African American. You may be with a disability. You could go on and on. But what the survey does, it really focuses on where that intersectionality is at a point where we're missing in the company. Or is there a population that we're not really getting to? And it points that out, and it helps us discover that. And then we can make efforts through our DEI group that we have, working with our leaders in the company to address that. to be able to take the resources that we have and apply it to solving that solution. What we found is we can make more ground, cover that ground through those intersectionality studies that we do. And it's just a great practice. So if you think about it, oftentimes when we look at diversity, even with our ERGs, we have a tendency to look at people as kind of one monolith. Like they belong to an Hispanic group, they belong to a Black group, they belong to an emerging talent group, without looking at people are actually a whole lot of things. And how do you study that and figure out where that intersectionality is meaningful to make the changes that you want in the organization?
That's fascinating, and I want to come back to that later, certainly. Is this a survey that everyone in the company takes? Can you
Yeah, it's a worldwide survey, and then we're able to, get the data down to groups that are small enough, obviously without being able to disclose who a person actually is. If it gets down too small, you wouldn't provide that information. So we're just really focused on being able to look at those trends with large enough groups, but you can get it down. You could say there's, an area of the company, maybe it's a business unit, maybe it's a unit in a different place. You could get it down to saying, where is your opportunity? And that might differ for each of the units. And then how do they get focused on working through that opportunity and making sure that happens? And spending time helping leaders be able to talk about it, get them comfortable, so they don't have a kind of a fear of addressing it, because it may be something they're not really themselves super comfortable. And then being able to coach them through that discussion so they can come up with a game plan and start working on it.
How many employees does Intel have?
122,000.
So that's a big survey.
There's a lot of data.
Yes. And just so we all are clear, what do you mean by intersectionality?
For example, think about, I may view myself as a male, but I also view myself as African American. I also view myself as a person who, has traveled a lot, done a bunch of things, have a particular personality type. There's all these things that make us up. In a company, we try to measure those kind of core things and are different. If in our company, if you're LGBTQ, it's a big, safe company for that. We want to make sure people feel good about who they are. We want to make sure we find, one of the intersectionalities we were struggling with was people who are LGBTQ, but also had a disability, for example. That was, for some reason, that was a miss for us. So we started to try to focus on that. We started trying to bring people forward to say, hey, if you have a disability, how can you be able to talk about this more from a leadership perspective, making people feel more comfortable, and then trying to make sure that that message was going out through that particular ERG that we have several around the world. So I think that was a good method for us to really think about how to do that without necessarily hammering somebody in the head with it, with the same message across the entire platform, but narrowing it down to something's not going. Let's coach those leaders in that particular location to effectively address that. As an example of it.
Thank you. It's a bit of a long question, but we're going to try it. So an effective but overlooked method of improving inclusion is a very simple thing, listening well. How can that be promoted within an organization and in terms of culture and structure of an organization? I know that's a tough question. I'm going to throw it at Sudha.
Actually, David, I'll answer the question slightly differently. I'll get to the voice hearing part of it. I think employees share their voice in different ways. One of it is direct conversations with managers and leaders. A lot of it is survey. Some of it is just the data that they don't share their voice, but we know of them. So I'll touch on one aspect of this, and I'll go a little bit deeper in it with specificity. So if you think about this, employees, the surveys, there is one question in it. And that one question, it's like a piece of the puzzle when you think about inclusion. It's albeit a critical piece of the puzzle. And that is, am I able to be myself at work? Right? And that question actually is very important. And I'm floating this to the top and calling it out because a lot of research shows that minority groups don't answer this question and rate this question very well. And how this translates to in their experience in the workday every day is, I have a natural style of being, right? And now at a workplace, I have to adapt that style. So this is my natural state, and this is my adaptive state. If these are close by with each other, it's easier for me. The dissonance is not that high. But if these are this far apart, the dissonance is significant. And when people of color or minority groups have to come in every day and have this dissonance, and that's the experience they are having, it really is hard for them. It causes burnout faster. So, Curran and I were talking about capacity. how can we increase someone's capacity when day in and day out that the drain is there and they're feeling it, right? So I would say this is an important aspect, and we should ask, understand, and see where are the areas where this is low, and make sure that we create a climate where people are comfortable being who they are.
Very nice, very nice. Janine, can I throw that one at you? How can something like listening well, and I bet you've dealt with this, how can listening well be promoted within an organization and actually make it stick?
So I think you start with making it a skill and talking about listening as a skill. And I think, we've all had experience where the direct line managers are the folks that really create the culture. I mean, yes, it has to start from the top, but there's often a big gap between the top and the folks that are really influencing day-to-day teams. And so the idea of, making listening a skill and really leaning in and investing in your direct line managers so that they are equipped and enabled to listen more than they talk, basically. And talk about it that way so that they know, like, this is, an attribute, a value of the business, and it's going to get them to the outcomes they're looking for.
I see. I was going to ask you just to go a little deeper on that. You think you just did so. So that's really directly reinforced as a corporate value that the line managers actually are rewarded for supporting. Is that correct?
And I mean, I think you'll hear me in a couple other questions talk about, I look at inclusion as a set of skills, right? And so once you start to introduce it as a set of skills of like, this is muscle we need to build, and you can't improve or change what you don't measure, and so you start to measure those skills, and then it starts to become on every, not only every individual contributor, but every line manager's radar that this is part of their contribution to the team, to the business. Okay, I'm going to come back to that too, but I just want to ask you, so what specific skill does that involve? Well, so listening, I mean, think back to like behavioral interviewing, right? So behavioral interviewing, you're listening more than you're talking. You're just kind of gently tapping and letting them, explain. So when you think about it that way, you're leading, Emtrain has a set of skills that we kind of identify and recommend, but I'm sure most organizations do. So leading with curiosity would be like the flip side of listening, right? So tell me about that. What do you think about that? And so just you're gently asking simple questions and just letting people share more. And they're not going to obviously share initially, but like as you continue to create that type of environment as a direct manager, you will start to get more information. Very good. So, Curran, taking up this same question, you can answer that if you want, but I also have another question.
Oh, sure. So, I think this is a great question because it's really, really hard to do. And what we are learning, what Sudha and I were talking a bit about, is that Gilead, we've been really focused on helping all of our leaders. We do believe that leaders have a key role in creating the environment where people feel included, right? I go back to like my college sports team, like it's like, do I feel part of the team or not? And the key thing that we're focused on three things. The first is capacity building, and then capability building, and then community. But the capacity building is first and foremost the key unlock for us, because our fundamental belief, and tons of research showing this, that our people leaders and our employees generally are just overloaded. The world is far more complex. There's so much going on. We're constantly pinged. I mean, my Apple Watch is still going off while I'm sitting here. There's just so much coming at us. And if you continue to just add to the cup, fill the cup up, the cup will overflow. And the ability to sit and listen, the ability to engage, the ability to understand your own biases and what's getting in the way of your relating to someone that's very different than you is going to be less and less if we don't help people build the capacity. And capacity is, how we are looking at it, is built on adult development, vertical development principles of how do you help build mindset capacity so that you're not just adding to the cup, but you're helping people to build perspective and continuously build and broaden that perspective as they face new challenges and more complexity, because it's going to happen. So how do we help with that? And how do we help them understand what is actually getting in their own way of being that person they need to be for their team, for the other people around them? Because it will look very different for every single leader. Why I'm not listening to you is different than maybe why Sudha's not able to listen to you. My experiences, no matter how much I like it or not, how I grew up, the messages I was told, even whether I was told, I need to finish all my food at the table, all of that influences who we are and how we engage. So whether you're aware of it or not, it's influencing you. So our philosophy is, well, we might as well help people understand what's influencing and then help them build the capability. And then help them with what does it look like when you're in the practice. So this whole growth, people call it growth mindset, whatever, but it's that mindset capacity and the ability to continuously flex that mindset and update your operating system over and over and over again, rather than just add on lots of new operating systems. So that's the way that we're thinking about it. It's not perfect, it's messy, it's uncomfortable, but it does lead to different conversations, and that's what we're hoping to do.
Very good, thank you. Brian, so yeah, in terms of culture and structure in a company, how far do some of those things go toward making people feel like they actually do belong?
Yeah, I think it actually helps quite a bit. But you also have to understand it's a journey that never ends. It's one of those things that you can't just look up and say, hey, we made it, we climbed the mountaintop, we're there. It just isn't that kind of thing. You're always fighting to ensure that the quietest voices in the room are heard. And it's funny when you talk about listening. I belong to a company, we don't listen worth a damn. I'm telling you, that's not our strength. But we know it, right?
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of engineers who are top people in college. They're just waiting for you to shut up so they can tell you how smart they are. And so we have to go back and forth with them all the time. But one of the things that's really worked for us, I know it seems like 5th grade on this, but unconscious bias training has really helped our company. It's really helped us understand what the other person is trying to go through. And as they're working and processing through it, they're working through their own, like, why can't I hear this person? And I had a manager who was honest. He said, you know what, I have this person on my team. Every time they talk, I just want to hit them. I look at them, I smile, but I want to hit them.
You're supposed to say that as the head of HR.
Well, we say don't do it, right? They don't act on it. But the problem is, they say, well, why do you feel that way? And I said, why don't you take this unconscious bias training? Because there's something at the core of this.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it came down to, they had this conversation about how they grew up, and then all the things that went into that, and then why that was interfering with their ability to be a great leader. They changed their behavior because not only they wanted to think that conversation would go better, but they wanted to be good. So they found that motivation to be able to do that. And that means bringing more people to the table. And even it seems sort of basic, it's something that is hard to do, because it really requires us to take that introspection. And so we teach that. We teach inclusive leaders during hiring. We try to make sure that we have interviewing panels that are diverse, because we found out, even though that McKinsey has documented this over and over again, if you have women on the interviewing panel, you actually tend to hire more women, right? So things like that we try to make sure we do over and over and over again. And then when you look around in the room, it starts to look a little bit different over time. It doesn't happen right away. But you start looking around and you start saying, wow, this is different. Not only in how people look, but what they say, how they behave. What's a culture that can have somebody from all far flung of the parts of the world and still bring all that together under one banner? And that's what we've been trying to do.
I wanted to ask each of you about using metrics to sort of figure out what's going on. And maybe Janine, if you could start, what kind of metrics have you found are effective in helping to clarify where a company stands in terms of diversity and inclusion?
So we're big proponents of measuring the skills, right? So I think a lot of organizations measure what I call the body count. How many of this do we have? How many of that do we have? What's our turnover rate? And those are a little bit more direct and easy to ascertain. The harder ones are the social dynamics. So, Curran, you talk about let's call a basketball team. You can have the greatest players in the world, but if they don't work well together, they'll lose, right? So it's the social dynamics can make or break you. And so, our particular kind of methodology is within training where we're like listening while we're learning. So as we're building the skills, we're showing what good looks like, oh, when you want to be an ally, do this, say this. Yeah, so both of you gave instances of what I would call allyship, right? It's like creating an opportunity for somebody. So you show it, and then you quickly ask, do your colleagues do this? How often have you experienced this? So you're getting some authentic feedback of what they see and what they're experiencing in the trenches, and you're mapping it to a set of skills so that you can measure the skills, at scale, or, to see where you're strong, where you're weak.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see, Sudha, do you want to try that one?
Sure. So when we think about measurement, right, and Janine said this, right, this basic thing which is measuring the body count and seeing the numbers set, and it's still needed. A lot of now public companies, shareholders ask for this to be published. They ask for accountability there, which is great. That's, I would say, like step one of it. And that's measuring representation and diversity. But then if you think about inclusion, it's a little bit art, it's a little bit science. It's not like a very straightforward way to measure inclusion. There is, like, Brian said, there is an inclusion index, there's surveys around that. But then there are things outside of it as well. Like, how do your different minority groups feel on engagement? How do they feel on intent to stay? How do they feel about, whether they're paid fairly? So these are all giving you certain pieces of that puzzle. So this is where inclusion is not like very straightforward to measure. You have to tell the story from all of the puzzle pieces on the board and fit them, and that will give you an idea of what the climate of experience is at your company. So that's one aspect of measuring inclusion. And then what I would also say is measuring the effectiveness of the different programs. Brian and Curran were talking about, the different skills and what managers have to learn. These are huge investments for the company, and measuring just like, are they effective? And as simple as it sounds, it's not easy to measure those, but at the very basic level, even saying like the leaders who are going through this training, do they have different outcomes compared to leaders who don't go through this training? And then what is it like, when is it reasonable to expect behavioral changes? You can't expect 2 days after the training for all behavioral changes to happen. So what are the different checkpoints you have, and has it been effective or not? So just having some checks and balances to overall measure the effectiveness of your programs, I think is a good place to also be in.
Thank you. Brian and Curran, I want to give you guys a shot at this question too. How are metrics most effectively used to improve a company?
Start. I think there's also, you can get analysis paralysis, right? So I think data is helpful, and then is what do you do with it? I think that's everyone's sort of said that as well, but there is a point. We're recently reviewing, for example, our diverse representation goals, and really looking at what talent is available versus what goals are we going to set, and our executives are asking for it to be cut in every which form and blah blah. It's like, look, we need more, because if we look at our inclusion index, but we don't, and we're strong in our inclusion index, but we don't have the diverse representation, then what are we measuring? That doesn't make sense. So.
May I ask you, what is the inclusion index?
It's very similar to what Brian was talking about in our employee survey. We have a number of questions related to belonging and how I feel about, do I have access to opportunities, those types of things. So we have an inclusion index that we view, but again, if it isn't a diverse group that's giving you input, then it doesn't really give you a lot of insight. So I think that's one thing, but I think it's important. We need to have goals and measures, but we also need to be clear about they're there to guide us, not to engineers, a lot of expert achievers in the work that we all do and the people we work with, the data is not going to give you the answer. It is input to the work we do. That is fundamental to how we engage, because it can be very paralyzing, it can be very challenging. The other thing is also setting clarity about, guess what? Progress doesn't mean scores will get better. Progress actually means things like we have upward feedback for our people leaders. For people leaders who are actually creating better climates of inclusion, you will see scores go down, because your people will more likely feel that they can give you more constructive feedback. And so one of the things that we're kind of testing out, we're big on trying experiments with it, which is also challenging for our organization. But hey, like with those people who've gone through some of these experiences that we put together around capacity building, and they've engaged their teams, how are we seeing, what do the scores look like? Yeah. And making it okay for them to actually be okay with scores going down, because we tend to overrate anyhow. So we're trying some experiments, kind of looking at what is the data telling us, rather than the data is giving us the answer. Yeah. And I think that's an important distinction in how we're thinking about data and metrics.
Maybe just a quick add. We have this thing called RISE goals at Intel. And the RISE goals are, think about it, some big picture, aspirational goals that we want to have. And we report out on that too. Some days we're making like great progress on it, some days we're not. But Curran's point is really good. It's not so much about the little tiny bits of data. It's where we're having effectiveness or not. And then how do we go back to figure out why aren't we having the effectiveness in that? For example, we have a women in technology leadership goal. If we're way below it, it's telling us something. Is it in our recruiting? Is it our retention? Is it the culture? Is it the training? It really creates that environment to ask questions and then to work with leaders and engage them in the process to say, how do we close that gap? What we try to avoid is the numbers paralysis game, like you described it so well. You know, you get the manager that says, I need 2 of these tomorrow, right? That's not the game. What we're trying to figure out is how to have an environment that everybody can be at their best when they come. So if in our environment we're not showing enough women in technical leadership, there's enough women that graduate from college who are technical leaders that we should represent that.
That's right, yeah.
And then a good thing would be is to be above your representation, because you're so good that people say, I will leave a company that doesn't do this to come work for you. That's what success to me looks like. It's not so much about the number. It's people choosing you because your environment is so good that I could see myself in your company, I could see myself growing, and I believe in your mission because you're going to support me in my mission. When those two come together, it's magic. That's what we're trying to do. The numbers just tell you what to look at. That's why it's important to measure, to me. But at the same time, let's not get lost just in the numbers. I thought that was beautiful.
And this is for anybody. Did the metrics actually enforce some kind of accountability? Somebody address that?
Absolutely.
Janine?
So I think as soon as any executive, and we've got clients showing it at the board level to audit committees at the board, they want to see the numbers, and so that is, it's a test basically. It's like, okay, I finally measured. It's time to do something. I mean, it usually prompts action.
Anybody else want to take that?
What I would say is, numbers definitely, prompts accountability. I'll also say, looking at it, it's just not one number, or if it's like, precipitously dropped. Always look at like whether it's trending in a direction. I think that is important to call out, because precipitous falls or increases catches people's attention, but the bigger story also comes in how it's trending over time.
And Brian, just going back a little bit, give me an example of a RISE goal.
So you think about, here's our population today, and this is what we want it to be by 2030. The RISE goals are really inclusive. It not only looks at kind of your gender, race, ethnicity, all that stuff. It also looks at sustainability and all those things. It's our big picture of what we want to do in the world, the influence we want to have. How do we change the world? We're a big company. We do have a lot of influence. We have to realize as a corporate citizen of the entire world that when we move into a community, we change the lives of almost everyone there. We're building a mega plant in Ohio. All of a sudden you'll have 3,000 people plus and a whole bunch of contractors that are going to have a new life. But as a way of doing that, part of our RISE goals is that we're going to make sure that we hire people in that community. We're going to go to junior colleges to pick people in these stuff. We're going to seed that to make sure people are part of that, because they will change the Midwest from a technology perspective. We know that will happen. How we do that sets a path that what other companies are going to follow us in. So for us, we try to make sure that those goals are constantly published so we can have that conversation. When we sit down with the governor of Ohio, those goals are in front of the governor. They're in front of the U.S. senator. They're in front of the town mayors. And we want to be clear. If we're here, we're going to be doing this. If you're not down with this, then we're in the wrong place. So bringing people to the table to talk about that, not only keeping ourselves accountable, but the communities and the vendors that we do business with accountable. We will change the lives of a lot of people. There'll be kids that will be going to college that didn't go to college before. There'll be parents that all of a sudden will be able to pay all their bills. Because if they work for us, they're going to be doing okay. And they're going to change their lives. And then they're going to give them the ability to go change the lives of a whole lot of other people. So that's why we publish those goals. It's not just about us. It's about the world that we can impact.
I love it. Yeah.
So, Curran, you work for a big biopharma company. Can you talk about some of the ways that diversity of your employee base and your customer base are important?
Yeah, I mean, look, we have a long history in virology, and specifically in HIV, and the work that we have done has fundamentally changed the lives of people who are diagnosed with HIV, and they're living very different lives and basically almost living like they're cured. They're not yet, but that is how it feels, and that's amazing. And we're also, pivoting into the oncology space and into areas where there are diverse communities who are more impacted by triple negative breast cancer, as an example. So I have the honor and the joy in many ways of working for a company where the purpose is so clear in terms of the work that we do and how it impacts communities that are often underserved. And so the opportunity that we have from an inclusion and diversity perspective is how do you kind of marry up the work that we do for the patients and those communities that we serve with the inclusion and diversity, the experience within the organization. And we believe that our employee base should reflect the patients and communities that we serve first and foremost. And so that's not a hard sell in the organization. People get it, they understand it, they want to be part of that. And they also understand that when you bring that diversity together, we're better able to solve for the challenges that people who are living with these conditions are experiencing. They also understand the communities and what's happening there. I mean, we have amazing programs like community liaison work, but we're trying new ways, like our employee resource groups have actually come together to work with our clinical trial diversity team to get out into communities to help the communities understand more about clinical trials. And knowledge is power, right? And we know that in many of these communities that clinical trials people don't know about them. And if they do, they're afraid of them. So we're trying to leverage the power of what inclusion means, inclusion for all, within Gilead, and bring that outside the walls through our employees, but also, very clearly in the work we do, I don't think that's even a question, but is how do we actually bring all of it together with our employees? So I could go on about that, but those are some of the key points.
That's
David, I'll add something to what Curran said. So one data point that we have seen is that the surgeons and physicians in United States, that demographic is changing quite a bit. We see a lot of people of color in the surgeon ranks and in the physician ranks. So know that even in the bio space, we are a med device space, they are customers in many ways and we are interacting with them. They need to see themselves also be reflected in our company base for them to feel a sense of connection to the company and also understanding that we would know their challenges. So just saying the demographic around us is changing and we all as companies have to evolve with that as well.
Thank you. Of course, all of this is, we all live in a political environment, and I want to give you guys each a shot at this, but I want to start with you, Janine. There certainly is political pushback to DEI, and can you address that, and does it make your work harder? Are there some solutions, or what's a good strategy in a time of kind of pushback?
Yeah, I would think, I'd say we need to kind of think about balance. I think that, since George Floyd's murder, it was in our face, and everyone, naturally, rightfully just jumped in. Yeah. And I think that unwittingly, I think inclusion became exclusion. Because we serve 500 plus orgs, and we see, I'd say 10% to 15% of every single org feels completely alienated, and they feel excluded, and that's us failing.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it. So, I mean, when we think about the language we use, when we think about building a bigger tent, and of course it's about representation and it's about showing our full community, but I think that we can do a better job of explaining the benefits to every single person, regardless of their background, their race, their gender, so on and so forth, because I think too many people think DEI means they're not included.
Yeah.
And that's a failure.
So that's being outmaneuvered in the messaging? Is that?
I think it's a messaging game, but I think it's also, I do think because of the momentum, I do think that DEI practitioners maybe double tapped a little too hard on certain communities rather than the whole community. So yes, certain communities have been so underrepresented, underprivileged for so long. There's an opportunity, let's use it, and of course, let's use it. And at the same time, let's bring everyone along, because as soon as you have contingencies or cohorts that think that they're not included in your strategies and in your efforts, you've just created enemies, which I think is what's happened over the last year.
Yes. Anyone else want to try that?
I'll comment. I spend an inordinate amount of time managing risk around DEI, and it's not time well spent. So I think to your point, it's sort of and we're actually talking about how do we reshape our messaging, to the points you've raised, and it is about inclusion for all. And the equity of experience to enable that will look different for different groups. And so how do we get that message across in a way that everyone can see themselves as part of this journey is super, super important. But DEI is so many things. It's not any one thing. So everything that happens in the external environment becomes a flashpoint in the organization. And then we have structures now around decision making around when do we talk about something? When don't we? Why would we talk about it? What is the tone of that conversation? Language matters. People are paying attention, and they are not afraid to directly email the CEO and say, "Hey, I'm expecting something different." So and that's okay, but we also need to have a point of view. And I think that's what's really important around DEI is what is our point of view? And it's not just one thing. It needs to serve all.
Okay. We're out of time. Does anybody else want to?
Just one thing I just want to say. Before we go. Just remember the words of the immortal James Brown. Say it loud. I'm DEI and I'm proud. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thanks, panel. We're out of time.